What really happened to the stars we grew up loving on Good Times? They made us laugh, cry, and feel like part of the Evans family. But behind the scenes, many of these beloved actors faced heartbreaking struggles that few ever knew. From sudden deaths and long battles with illness to private tragedies and unspoken pain, their stories go far beyond the screen. In this video, we'll revisit 13 iconic cast members from Good Times who tragically passed away. Some far too young, others after years of quiet suffering. This isn't just about fame or nostalgia. It's about honoring the people who made Good Times unforgettable and understanding the real-life heartbreak behind the laughter. 1. Jeanette Dubois, as Willona Woods. On February 17, 2020, Jeanette Dubois died suddenly in her sleep at home in Glendale, California. She was 74. The official cause, cardiac arrest. But her death certificate told a deeper story, one of declining health, including chronic kidney disease, peripheral vascular issues, and high blood pressure. Days later, her ashes were scattered at sea. Born Jeanette Teresa Dubois in Philadelphia and raised in Brooklyn, she launched her acting career on Broadway in the 1960s, starring in A Raisin in the Sun and Golden Boy. She broke barriers early, becoming the first black woman cast as a regular on a daytime soap opera with Love of Life. But it was her role as Willona Woods on Good Times that made her unforgettable. Willona was fierce, fashionable, and funny, the single neighbor who always had something sharp to say and a heart that could crack open with tenderness. When she adopted Penny, played by a young Janet Jackson, Dubois didn't just mentor her on screen. They became lifelong friends off it. Jackson would later write, "She broke stereotypes and changed the landscape for black women in entertainment." But Dubois' legacy extended far beyond Good Times. She co-wrote and sang the iconic theme song Movin' On Up for the Jeffersons, a defiant anthem of progress. She voiced Mrs. Avery on the stop-motion series The PJs, winning 2 Emmys. She played roles in A Piece of the Action, Moshe, Home Improvement, and even Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle. She released music albums, founded the Pan-African Film Festival, and lived life with a theatrical spark, dressing to the nines, making co-stars laugh on set, and owning every room she entered. Behind the laughs and big entrances, however, was a woman quietly carrying pain. Her final years were shadowed by illness. Yet not once did she let it define her. Even near the end, she radiated confidence and wit, never asking for sympathy, only space to perform. 2. Esther Rolle, as Florida Evans. Esther Rolle died on November 17, 1998, just 9 days after her 78th birthday. The cause was complications from diabetes, a disease she had fought for years, intensified by kidney failure that left her dependent on dialysis. In her later years, she had survived a serious car accident that fractured her ribs and bruised her heart. Yet it was not physical trauma, but a deeper battle, against the roles she was handed, against the limits of Hollywood. That defined her. Esther Rolle was best known as Florida Evans, the no-nonsense matriarch from Good Times. But off-screen, she fought tirelessly against the very image she was often paid to portray, the passive, eye-rolling black maid. "I told them I couldn't compound the lie that black fathers don't care about their children," she once said, explaining her demand that Good Times include a strong black father figure. She left the show after 3 seasons in protest over the direction of JJ's character, whom she saw as a damaging stereotype. It was a move that risked her career and almost cost her everything, but her principles held. She eventually returned after producers agreed to shift the tone. Ironically, despite her resistance to stereotype, many of her most acclaimed roles were maids. In Maud, in Driving Miss Daisy, and in Summer of My German Soldier, the role that won her an Emmy. On stage, she performed in A Raisin in the Sun and in Maya Angelou's Down in the Delta, her final film, released posthumously. She was nominated for a Golden Globe, became the first woman to receive the NADACP Chairman's Civil Rights Leadership Award, and even in her late 70s, continued to speak out about racial justice in the arts. Born in 1920 in Pompano Beach, Florida, the 10th of 18 children of a vegetable farmer, Rolla was raised in a family of storytellers. She followed her older sister to New York and began acting in earnest in her 40s. Her presence was commanding. Norman Lear, who cast her, said simply, "Wherever she was, you knew she was there." 3. John Amos as James Evans. John Amos passed away on August 21, 2024, at the age of 84. The cause of death was congestive heart failure, but the final chapter of his life was marred by something far more painful than illness, a bitter public feud between his own children. In a tragic twist, his death was not announced until 6 weeks later, as Amos himself had reportedly requested the delay to avoid a circus surrounding his passing. By the time his daughter Shannon learned of his death, it was through the media, like the rest of the world. In the months leading up to his death, the actor's life was consumed by turmoil. Shannon Amos had accused her brother, K.C. Amos, of elder abuse, alleging he had isolated their father, mismanaged his care, impersonated him in communications, and eroded his legacy. Legal complaints were filed in New Jersey and Colorado. Police in Los Angeles investigated and later closed the case. John, in his final public statements, defended K.C., calling him a caring, thoughtful human being, and dismissed the abuse allegations as false and unmerited. Even so, a restraining order barred K.C. from any contact with Shannon, complicating the family's ability to grieve or communicate. This tragic family battle overshadowed the achievements of a man who helped define a generation of television. Amos rose to fame playing James Evans Sr., the stern yet loving patriarch on Good Times. His portrayal of a hardworking black father, a rarity on TV at the time, made him a household name. But Amos's time on the show ended in conflict. He was fired after clashing with producers over what he felt were inauthentic and damaging portrayals of black life, particularly in the increasingly slapstick tone surrounding Jimmy Walker's JJ character. "I'll be the expert on that if you don't mind," Amos once said about his insistence on cultural accuracy. His refusal to compromise led to his character being killed off, but it also cemented his status as an artist of principle. He found redemption and acclaim again as the adult Kunta Kinte in Roots, a role that changed both his career and American television history. "It was the culmination of all the misconceptions and stereotypical roles that I had lived and seen being offered to me," he said. 4. Johnny Brown as Nathan Bookman. Johnny Brown died unexpectedly on March 2, 2022, at the age of 84. After collapsing just moments after a routine pacemaker checkup. His daughter, actress Sharon Catherine Brown, announced the devastating news with raw grief. "He was literally snatched out of our lives, barely able to breathe." Brown's most beloved role was as the bumbling but lovable Nathan Bookman on Good Times, where his character was constantly mocked with cruel nicknames like Buffalo Butt, jokes that even the youngest cast members, including Janet Jackson, were scripted to deliver. In a 2019 interview, Brown reflected on the toll. "They used it in every show. When I left the scene, they used it. I couldn't say anything because I had a wife and 2 kids to support." That quiet resignation revealed the tragedy behind the comedy, an entertainer caught in a system where dignity often took a backseat to a paycheck. Born in Florida and raised in Harlem, Johnny Brown's talents emerged early. He won an amateur contest at the Apollo, performed alongside jazz greats like Sam "The Man" Taylor, and even led show-stopping numbers on Broadway, including Golden Boy with Sammy Davis Jr. He was a gifted mimic, a strong vocalist, and a quick-witted comedian. Brown was even in the running to play Lamont on Sanford and Son, a role that could have changed his trajectory. but contract obligations with Laugh-In cost him the chance. Still, he kept going. He appeared in over 50 productions, from The Wiz to Life, from Kenan and Kel to Touched by an Angel. Whether voicing cartoons, guest starring on sitcoms, or belting out jingles like "Right on, brothers, right on" in Papermate commercials, Brown was never out of work, just out of the spotlight. He helped launch The Leslie Uggams Show, the first variety series hosted by a black woman, and toured the country in the gospel truth. His career was a patchwork of appearances, but together they formed a legacy of persistence. He was married to June Russell for 61 years and was a father, grandfather, and mentor to many. He left behind a family and a generation of co-stars who loved him. Janet Jackson, in her tribute, recalled him as full of laughter and forever smiling. That was Johnny, the man who gave his all, even when what he got in return wasn't always fair. In a world that typecast him and a business that often underpaid him in recognition, Johnny Brown still managed to leave behind something more meaningful than stardom: love, laughter, and the memory of a man who never stopped showing up. 5. Ben Powers, as Keith Anderson. Ben Powers died on April 6, 2015, at age 64, after a private battle with liver cancer. His death came quietly, far from the spotlight he once graced, and years after he'd left Hollywood behind. Powers was not a man with dozens of credits or decades-long fame, but for a brief moment in the late 1970s, he was part of television history. And then he was gone. Born Alton Adelbert Ben Powers in Brooklyn and raised by his grandparents in Providence, Rhode Island, he was an artist before he was ever an actor. A gifted sketcher, he studied at the Rhode Island School of Design, but it was his stage presence, not his canvas, that drew attention. Performing stand-up in Providence with impressions and music, he caught the eye of a Hollywood agent. His charm and good looks led to gigs at Playboy clubs and eventually a breakout spot on the revived Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In 1977. In 1978, Powers joined the 6th and final season of Good Times as Keith Anderson, the NFL hopeful who marries Thelma Evans. Their wedding, full of hope and joy, takes a sharp turn when Keith injures his leg walking out of the church. The injury derails his career and sends him into a downward spiral of bitterness and alcoholism. In one of the show's most emotional arcs, Keith drunkenly slaps Thelma, and she slaps him back hard. Actress Bernadette Stanis later remembered the moment. "I really smacked him," he said. "Did you really have to do it so hard?" But beneath the on-screen tension was a respectful friendship. "He treated me like a queen," Stanis said. "He was so professional, so talented, so nice." Despite that promising start, Powers' screen career never fully took off. After Good Times, he found a recurring role on The New Mike Hammer and made appearances in The Greatest American Hero, Laverne and Shirley, and Flamingo Road. He acted in minor film roles, from a welfare recipient in Cheech and Chong's next movie to the pimp in Things Are Tough All Over and Al in The Man Who Loved Women with Burt Reynolds. But by the late 1980s, Powers had quietly stepped away from Hollywood. He never returned. The reasons remain largely unknown. Powers was intensely private in his later years, living far from the industry that once embraced him. He rarely gave interviews, and by the early 1990s, even his former co-stars had lost touch. His absence left a lingering question. What happened to Ben Powers? 6. Albert Reed as Alderman Fred Davis / Mr. Wilson. Albert Reed Jr. died on May 31, 1986, in Bishop, California, at the age of 76. His death came with little media attention, despite a life that bridged two very different worlds: acting and law enforcement. Known to audiences for playing Fred C. Davis, a corrupt local politician on Good Times, Reed was more than just a character actor. He lived a rare double life. By day, the real chief of security at LAX. By night, a shady official, a stern doctor, or a reluctant uncle. Born in Greenville, Texas in 1910, Reed entered public service long before Hollywood came calling. He began working in airport security in 1959, climbing the ranks until becoming chief of security at Los Angeles International Airport from 1979 to 1983. Ironically, one of his earliest screen roles was in the 1970 disaster film Airport, where he portrayed Lieutenant Ned Ordway, essentially playing himself. But it was television that made Reed a familiar face, if not a household name. He had memorable roles on The Jeffersons, as Uncle Ward, The Secret of Isis, as Dr. Barnes and Sanford and Son, where he briefly played a character named Grady Wilson, a role later made iconic by Whitman Mayo. On Good Times, his portrayal of Alderman Fred C. Davis captured the community's distrust of political figures. Reed gave the character a slick performative charm that hinted at deeper disillusionment, a realism perhaps shaped by his own years in law enforcement. Reed never became a star, and he didn't chase it. Acting seemed to be a side passion, something he balanced with a serious commitment to public safety. But that quiet devotion may have cost him the recognition he deserved. By the time he retired from both careers in the early 80s, he slipped into obscurity. 7. Theodore Wilson as Sweet Daddy Williams. July 21st, 1991, at just 47 years old, after suffering a stroke at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. The news came as a shock to fans who remembered him as the flamboyant, sharp-dressed neighborhood hustler Sweet Daddy Williams on Good Times. Few knew he had undergone open-heart surgery years prior, a silent warning of the tragedy that would later unfold. Born Theodore Roosevelt Wilson in Harlem, New York, he initially studied music at Florida A&M University before switching to drama. His early acting roots were in serious theater, joining the Negro Ensemble Company and the Arena Stage Repertory, but it was the 1970s sitcom boom that brought him into living rooms across America. He got his start in Cotton Comes to Harlem and quickly found work in television, including a regular role on Roll Out and as Earl the Postman on That's My Mama. Wilson's big break came with Good Times, where his portrayal of Sweet Daddy, a flashy, intimidating, yet oddly lovable bookie, became iconic. The character, draped in gold and smooth talk, had depth beneath the flash, revealing a performer who could balance menace with charm. Wilson later led Sanford Arms, a spin-off of Sanford and Son, but the show was canceled after just 4 episodes, a missed opportunity in a career full of potential. Off-screen, Wilson's personal life was grounded. He had 3 children, 2 with actress Joan Pringle, his co-star from That's My Mama. Though never a household name, he was respected in the industry, continuing to work steadily in guest roles on shows like The Golden Girls, Family Matters, Quantum Leap, and even Tales from the Crypt. His final film appearance was in Blood In, Blood Out, released posthumously. 8. Helen Martin as Weeping Wanda Williams. Helen Martin passed away on March 25, 2000, at the age of 90 from a heart attack in Monterey, California. Her death marked the end of a remarkable 6-decade career, but true to her nature, she left behind laughter. Just a few years before her passing, she had shocked and delighted late-night audiences on Conan O'Brien by proclaiming, "I love reefer," promoting a film where she played a pot-smoking grandmother. She followed that confession with a cheeky dance and a declaration that, had she not become an actress, she'd have been a stripper. Born in 1909 in St. Louis and raised in Nashville, Helen Dorothy Martin came of age in a world that offered black actresses little more than maid roles, but she carved out a legacy by refusing to be boxed in. After attending Fisk University, she left to pursue acting, supporting herself during the Depression as a domestic worker. She studied with the WPA Theater and became a founding member of the American Negro Theater, alongside greats like Sidney Poitier and Ruby Dee. Martin made her Broadway debut in 1937 and became a respected character actress. Her credits included Native Son, directed by Orson Welles, The Amen Corner, Pearly Victorious, and The Blacks. Despite often being cast as mothers or grandmothers, she brought depth and humor to every role, from the musical Raisin to Period of Adjustment. Television brought her late-life fame. She played Wanda Weeping Wanda on Good Times and the nosy neighbor Pearl Shea on 227. To younger audiences, she became the go-to grandma in films like Hollywood Shuffle, Bulworth, I Got the Hookup, and House Party 2. She never married, never had children, but her on-screen presence made her a maternal figure to generations. 9. Moses Gunn, as Carl Dixon. Moses Gunn died on December 16, 1993, at the age of 64, from complications related to asthma. A slow, cruel end for a man whose deep, resonant voice once boomed across theater stages and television screens. He had been sick since May, but kept working until his final months, determined to leave the stage on his own terms. At the time of his death, he was co-starring in powerful South African dramas like Blood Knot and My Children, My Africa, still fighting for truth through performance. Born in 1929 in St. Louis, Gunn's early life was marked by tragedy. After his mother died, his family fractured. At age 12, he ran away, riding freight trains and fending for himself. Eventually, a compassionate teacher, Jewel Ritchie, took him in and helped him return to school. Gunn served in the Army, earned a degree from Tennessee State University, and studied drama at the University of Kansas. But it was the stage, especially Shakespeare, where he found his voice. He debuted in the groundbreaking off-Broadway production of The Blacks in 1962 and later co-founded the Negro Ensemble Company, where he earned acclaim in productions like The First Breeze of Summer. Gunn became a dominant presence in American theater, taking on Othello and winning multiple Obie and NAACP awards. Despite his classical chops, Hollywood rarely offered him parts worthy of his talent. His most memorable film role was as Bumpy Jonas in Shaft and Booker T. Washington in Ragtime. He also appeared in The Never-Ending Story and Heartbreak Ridge. On television, he earned an Emmy nomination for Roots as Kintango and played Carl Dixon in Good Times, the kind-hearted shop owner who marries Florida Evans. 10. Matthew Stybeard as Monty. Matthew Stybeard died on January 8, 1981, just days after turning 56, following a devastating stroke and a fall down a flight of stairs. The fall caused serious head injuries, and complications led to pneumonia. Found in a modest motel room where he had been living alone, Beard's final days were a quiet and tragic contrast to the roaring laughter he once brought to millions as a beloved child star of our gang, later known on TV as The Little Rascals. Born in Los Angeles on January 1, 1925, Beard was one of 14 children raised by a preacher father in East L.A. At just 5 years old, he was plucked from obscurity to replace Farina in Hal Roach's Our Gang comedies. With his trademark derby hat and mischievous wit, Stymie became an instant favorite. Director Robert McGowan named him Stymie because the boy was always wandering onto sets and stymieing production. What started as a nickname became an identity Beard carried for the rest of his life. As a child actor, Beard helped support his large family with his income, even naming his siblings after fellow castmates. But like many child stars, the adoration faded when he grew up. By the time he hit his teens, the roles had dried up, and so had the money. Seeking acceptance and escape, Beard turned to drugs and crime. By age 20, he was in prison. The next 2 decades were marked by a painful cycle of heroin addiction, arrests, and incarceration. In the 1960s, Beard found a lifeline through Synanon, a controversial drug rehab facility where he finally overcame his addiction. He later became a public speaker on drug awareness and made a modest comeback with guest spots on shows like Good Times, Maude, Sanford and Son, and even a role in the Buddy Holly story where he wore his iconic derby hat. Despite his efforts at redemption, Beard's later years were marked by poverty and isolation, but he remained proud of his past and committed to helping others avoid his mistakes. He was buried with the derby that made him famous. 11. Raymond Allen as Ned the Wino. Raymond Allen passed away on August 10, 2020, at the age of 91 after a long and quiet battle with respiratory illness. Diagnosed with a bacterial infection earlier that year and struggling with pneumonia since 2016, Allen spent his final years in a California care facility, far from the sound stages that once echoed with his laughter. When he died, he was the last surviving sibling out of 12. His daughter, actress Terrence Allen, announced the news on Facebook with heartfelt words. His warmth, kind heart, and clever sayings will be missed. His laughter will ring in heaven. Born in 1929 in Kansas City, Missouri, Allen's journey into acting began modestly in the 1940s, but it wasn't until the 1970s that he became a beloved face in American households. On Sanford and Son, he portrayed the sweet but perpetually tipsy Woodrow "Woody" Anderson, the henpecked husband of Aunt Esther, played by LaWanda Page. Their volatile chemistry made him a fan favorite. On Good Times, he transformed into Ned the Wino, a streetwise character whose drunken honesty brought both comedy and raw realism to the sitcom's portrayal of urban life. Allen had a gift. He made intoxication oddly charming, turning potential caricatures into fully fleshed-out, warm-hearted men with their own sense of dignity. Whether on Starsky and Hutch as Merle the Earl or in guest spots on The Jeffersons, The Love Boat, and What's Happening, he stood out, even in small roles. His style was subtle but unforgettable, and his characters lingered long after the credits rolled. Sadly, Allen's acting career came to an abrupt halt in 1985 due to illness. Though forced to step away from the screen, he continued making public appearances, signing autographs, and connecting with fans well into his later years. But as time passed, so did the spotlight. His final years were spent largely out of public view, until his passing reminded audiences just how much joy he brought. 12th. Bubba Smith as Claude. Bubba Smith was found dead in his Los Angeles home on August 3, 2011, at age 66. Initially ruled as drug intoxication complicated by heart disease, a deeper truth emerged later. Smith suffered from stage 3 CTE, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma. He became one of the earliest NFL greats diagnosed posthumously, highlighting the invisible damage beneath football's glory. Born Charles Aaron Smith in 1945 in segregated Texas, Bubba rose to fame at Michigan State, where he became a two-time All-American. Drafted first overall in 1967, he played 9 seasons in the NFL, winning Super Bowl V and earning a reputation as a feared defensive end. Yet he refused to wear his Super Bowl ring, haunted by the loss in Super Bowl III. After an injury ended his career, Smith sued the NFL and transitioned to acting, most famously as the lovable Moses Hightower in Police Academy. Despite fame, he lived privately, never married, rarely gave interviews, and carried the psychological scars of his football past. His 1983 autobiography hinted at disillusionment with the sport, and after death, his CTE diagnosis gave tragic weight to the damage he endured in silence. 13th. Richard Ward as Henry Evans. Richard Ward died of a heart attack on July 1, 1979 at 64, just months after one of his final TV appearances. A former New York City police detective, Ward didn't begin acting until 1949, but his late start led to a powerful career marked by emotional depth and quiet dignity. In 1972, he made history portraying Willie Loman in the first all-black production of Death of a Salesman, a role that earned him critical respect and cultural significance. Ward's gravelly voice and commanding presence made him a standout in 1970s television. He appeared in The Jeffersons, Sanford and Son, All in the Family, and Starsky and Hutch. but it was his recurring role as Henry Evans on Good Times that left the deepest impression. As the estranged father seeking forgiveness, Ward delivered one of the show's most touching storylines. His film work included The Learning Tree, Mandingo, and The Jerk, often portraying characters grappling with racial and moral complexity. Though he never became a household name, Richard Ward's legacy is one of quiet power and authenticity, an actor who spoke volumes with presence alone. Did you know all of these Good Times actors had passed away? Or did some come as a shock? They made us laugh, cry, and feel like part of the Evans family. But behind the fame were real lives filled with hardship, illness, and untold tragedy. Today, we honor their memory and the lasting joy they gave to millions. If their stories touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to help keep their legacies alive. And tell us in the comments, which actor from Good Times meant the most to you, and why?